She arrived in America with nothing but a small suitcase and a new name. Her husband called her Frances, but back in Hiroshima, she had been Fumiko. The year was 1948, and she was one of thousands of Japanese women who married American soldiers after the war. But unlike the others who shared their stories, Fumiko Nakamura would take hers to the grave. Her children grew up knowing almost nothing about her life before Iowa, and it wasn't until they opened a locked box after her funeral that they understood why. This is the story of a woman who survived the atomic bomb, crossed an ocean for love, and spent 70 years hiding the truth from the people she loved most. August 6, 1945. Fumiko Nakamura was 19 years old. She woke up that morning in her family's small wooden house in Hiroshima, just 2 kilometers from the city center. The house had been in the Nakamura family for 3 generations. It was modest but comfortable, with sliding paper doors, tatami mat floors, and a small garden where her mother grew vegetables and flowers. Her father, Kenji Nakamura, was a respected schoolteacher at the local elementary school. He was a gentleman who spent his evenings writing poetry by candlelight, his brush moving across rice paper with practiced elegance. Her mother, Hana, sold vegetables at the morning market and was known throughout the neighborhood for her kindness and her exceptional cooking. Her older brother, Takeshi, 23, worked at the postal office and dreamed of becoming a doctor after the war ended. He had been secretly studying medical texts, preparing for the day when universities would reopen. It was a Tuesday morning. The air raid sirens had gone off the night before, wailing through the darkness, but nothing had happened. People were used to false alarms by then. The war had dragged on for so long that fear had become routine. Life continued in its strange wartime rhythm. Fumiko was supposed to help her mother at the market that day. She had been doing it every Tuesday and Thursday since she was 12, learning which customers preferred which vegetables, how to arrange displays, how to negotiate prices. But that morning was different. Her Aunt Tomoko, who lived in a village 30 kilometers east, had fallen ill with a high fever. Her mother asked Fumiko to take the early train to check on her and bring medicine from the city pharmacy. Fumiko didn't want to go. She had plans to meet her best friend Akiko that afternoon to practice calligraphy. Fumiko loved calligraphy. She had been studying it since she was 7 years old, and her teacher, Master Yamamoto, said she had real talent. He told her she could become a professional instructor someday. It was one of the few respectable careers available to women. Fumiko dreamed about it constantly, but her mother insisted someone had to check on Aunt Tomoko. Takeshi couldn't go because of work. Her father had classes to teach, so it had to be Fumiko. She argued briefly, but her mother's expression made it clear there was no room for negotiation. So Fumiko packed a small bag with rice balls her mother had made that morning, medicine from the pharmacy, a book of poetry her father had lent her, and her calligraphy supplies in case she had time to practice. At 7:30 that morning, she boarded a train heading east away from the city. She found a seat by the window and watched Hiroshima slowly disappear behind her. The morning was beautiful. Clear blue sky, warm sun, birds singing in the rice fields. The train was half empty. Most passengers were elderly farmers or merchants. Fumiko opened her book and tried to read, but she couldn't concentrate. She felt irritated about missing her plans with Akiko. She had no idea that her irritation had just saved her life. At 8:15, the world ended. Fumiko was sitting by the window, watching rice fields pass by when she saw it. A flash of light so bright it turned the entire sky white. For a split second, she thought the sun had exploded. The light was so intense it hurt her eyes even through closed eyelids. Then nothing. Silence. Then the shockwave hit. The train shook violently, like a giant hand had grabbed it. People screamed. The windows shattered inward, sending glass flying through the cabin like 1,000 tiny knives. Fumiko threw herself to the floor and covered her head with her arms. She felt glass cutting her hands and arms. She felt the train tilting. She heard people crying, praying, screaming. She didn't know what had happened. No one did. The train screeched to a halt. Fumiko slowly sat up. Her hands were bleeding. Her ears were ringing so loud she could barely hear anything else. She looked out the broken window and saw something impossible. A massive cloud was rising into the sky over Hiroshima. It was shaped like a mushroom, black and red and orange and purple, bigger than anything she had ever seen. It was so huge it didn't look real. The cloud kept growing, rising higher and higher, blotting out the sun. The other passengers were standing now, crowding toward the windows, staring in horror. An old man said it must have been a bomb. A woman said the Americans had finally done it. Another woman started praying loudly. A man said his wife and children were in that city. His voice broke. He started crying. Fumiko felt her stomach drop. Her family was in that city. Her mother, her father, her brother, her home, her friends, her entire world. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't work. They felt like water. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. The train conductor came through, his face pale as paper, his hands shaking. He announced that the tracks ahead were destroyed. They couldn't go forward or back. Everyone would have to get off and wait. Wait for what? Fumiko thought. Wait for the world to end? She didn't wait. She pushed past the other passengers and jumped off the train. She started running toward Hiroshima. She didn't care that it was 15 kilometers away. She didn't care that her hands were bleeding. She had to get home. She had to find her family. She ran for an hour before her body gave out. She collapsed on the side of the road, gasping for air, her vision blurring, her heart pounding. An old man on a bicycle stopped and asked if she was hurt. Fumiko told him she had to get to Hiroshima. He looked at her with profound sadness and said no one could get into the city. He said it was gone. Fumiko screamed that he was lying. He wasn't. He helped her onto his bicycle and said he would take her as far as he could. His name was Mr. Sato. They rode for 3 hours. The closer they got to Hiroshima, the worse it became. The air changed. It smelled like burning metal and burning flesh and something chemical. Ash fell from the sky like snow, covering everything in gray. It got in Fumiko's mouth, her nose, her eyes. It tasted like death. People were walking out of the city, or what was left of them. They didn't look human anymore. Their skin was hanging off their bodies in strips. Their faces were burned beyond recognition. Their hair was gone. Their clothes were melted into their skin. Some were naked, their bodies charred black. They walked slowly, mechanically, their arms held out in front of them because it hurt too much to let them hang. Their eyes were empty, dead. They had seen something no human should ever see. Fumiko kept asking if anyone had seen the Nakamura family. No one answered. Most couldn't speak. Their mouths were too burned. Some tried to make sounds, but only rasping noises came out. They just walked past her like ghosts. Some collapsed right there on the road and didn't get up. Mr. Sato told her to keep moving. He said if she stopped, she would never start again. By the time they reached the outskirts of Hiroshima, it was late afternoon. Mr. Sato refused to go further. He said it wasn't safe. He said the fires were still burning. He said there might be more bombs. Fumiko thanked him and kept walking. She had to know. The city was gone. Not damaged. Not destroyed. Gone. Erased. There were no buildings standing, no houses, no shops, no temples, no streets, just rubble and fire and bodies. Miles of nothing. Fumiko walked through it in a daze. She tried to find her neighborhood, but she couldn't recognize anything. Every landmark was gone. The school where her father taught, the market where her mother worked, the post office where Takeshi worked. All of it was just piles of broken wood and twisted metal and ash. She called out for her parents, for Takeshi. No one answered. The only sounds were the crackling of fires and the moaning of the dying. She saw a woman sitting in the rubble, holding a child's body. The child was burned black. The woman was rocking back and forth, singing a lullaby. She saw a man digging through debris with his bare hands, even though his fingers were burned to the bone. He was calling a name over and over. She saw an elderly couple lying together in the ruins, holding hands, both dead. She saw things she would never forget, things that would haunt her dreams forever. She searched for 3 days. She slept on the ground, surrounded by corpses. She drank water from broken pipes, not caring if it was contaminated. She ate nothing. She pulled bodies out of the rubble, hoping and dreading, but she never found her family. Not their bodies, not their belongings, not even a piece of clothing she recognized. They had simply vanished, erased, vaporized, as if they had never existed. On the 3rd day, Fumiko stopped searching. She sat down in the ruins of what might have been her neighborhood and stared at nothing. She wanted to die. She prayed to die, but her body refused. She kept breathing, and she hated herself for it. By the end of August, Fumiko was living in a refugee camp on the edge of the city. Thousands of survivors were there, packed into makeshift tents and shelters. Most were sick. Something was wrong with them. Their hair fell out in clumps. Their skin turned black and peeled away. They vomited blood. They developed strange burns that appeared days after the bomb and wouldn't heal. They bled from their gums, their noses, their eyes. They died slowly, in agony, while doctors stood by helplessly. There was no medicine, no treatment, no understanding of what was happening. The doctors called it radiation sickness, but they didn't know how to treat it. Fumiko watched them die one by one and wondered when it would be her turn. She stopped eating. She stopped speaking. She wanted to die, but her body kept surviving. In September, American forces arrived. General Douglas MacArthur had accepted Japan's surrender, and now U.S. troops were occupying the country. They came with trucks full of supplies, with doctors and nurses, with photographers documenting the destruction. Fumiko hated them. They had done this. They had dropped the bomb. They had killed her family, but she also needed them. The Americans brought food, medicine, jobs. If she wanted to survive, she had to work for the people who had destroyed her life. It felt like betrayal, but she had no choice. Survival required compromise. So she applied for work at a military base kitchen in Kure, a port city near Hiroshima. She got the job. She scrubbed pots, peeled potatoes, washed dishes, mopped floors, and avoided eye contact with the soldiers. She didn't want their pity. She didn't want their guilt. She just wanted a paycheck so she could eat. The work was hard and the hours were long, but it kept her mind occupied. When she was working, she didn't have to think. She didn't have to remember. That's where she met Earl Whitlock. He was a private from Iowa, 23 years old, assigned to the occupation forces in late 1945. He had sandy blonde hair, blue eyes, and a face that looked too young for war. He worked in supply logistics, which meant he spent a lot of time in the kitchen. Fumiko noticed him because he was different from the other soldiers. He didn't stare at her. He didn't make crude jokes. He just smiled politely and said thank you every time she handed him a tray. At first she ignored him, but he kept smiling. Every single day. Good morning. Thank you. Have a nice day. His Japanese was terrible, but he tried. He carried a little notebook where he wrote down phrases. And for some reason, that made her angry. How dare he be kind? How dare he act like everything was normal? One day, in early 1946, Earl brought her a chocolate bar. He set it on the counter and walked away before she could refuse. Fumiko stared at it for a long time. She hadn't had chocolate in years. Before the war, her father would sometimes bring home small pieces as a treat. She remembered how it tasted, sweet and rich. She didn't want to take this chocolate. She didn't want anything from an American soldier. But she was so hungry, so tired, so empty. So she took it. She ate it slowly, savoring every bite, and she hated herself for enjoying it. The next day, he brought her another one. This time, she said thank you in English. It was one of the few English words she knew. He grinned like she had given him the greatest gift. After that, it became a routine. He brought her small things: chocolate, canned fruit, a pair of gloves because her hands were cracked and bleeding. Once he brought her a book of English phrases with Japanese translations. He said it might help her. She didn't understand why he was doing this. She didn't trust it, but she didn't stop him either, because his kindness was the only light in her darkness. By spring of 1946, they were talking regularly. Earl's Japanese was improving slowly. He practiced every day with his notebook. Fumiko's English was still almost non-existent, but she was learning. She listened carefully to how the soldiers spoke. She memorized phrases. Earl told her about Iowa, about his family's farm, about endless fields of corn and soybeans, about how he had never left the state until the war. He showed her pictures of his family, his parents standing in front of a big red barn, his younger sister on a horse, cornfields stretching to the horizon. Fumiko thought it looked empty and lonely, but also peaceful. No bombs, no fires, no death. He asked her about Japan, about her family, about her life before the war. She said there was nothing to tell. He said everyone had something to tell. She said her story ended on August 6th. Everything before that was gone. He didn't push. He just sat with her during her breaks and talked about nothing important. About the weather, about food, about movies. And for the first time since the bomb, Fumiko felt like she could breathe, like maybe she was still human. By summer of 1946, she realized she was falling in love with him. It terrified her. She had no right to be happy. Her family was dead. Her city was gone. And here she was, smiling at an American soldier. It felt like betrayal, but Earl didn't feel like the enemy. He felt like the only safe thing in a world that had tried to kill her. He was gentle and patient and kind. He made her laugh, which she hadn't done in over a year. He made her feel human again. And that was both a gift and a curse. One night in July, he asked her if she wanted to go for a walk. They went to the harbor and sat on the docks, their legs dangling over the water. The water was calm. The sky was clear. Stars reflected on the surface like scattered diamonds. It was beautiful. Earl was quiet for a long time. Then he said, very carefully in broken Japanese, that he wanted to marry her. Fumiko didn't understand at first. He repeated it, mixing English and Japanese. Marry, you and me, together, forever. Fumiko started crying. She said it was impossible. She said his country had destroyed hers. She said people would hate them. She said she had nothing to offer. He said he wasn't his country. He was just a man who loved her. He said he didn't care what people thought. And for the first time in a year, Fumiko let herself believe that maybe she could have a future, that maybe surviving wasn't a betrayal. But marriage wasn't simple. In 1946, the U.S. military didn't allow soldiers to marry Japanese women. Fraternization was officially discouraged, and marriage was outright banned. The military brass believed Japanese women were trying to trap American soldiers. But Earl didn't care about the rules. He said he would wait. He said he would fight for her. And he did. He wrote letters to his commanding officer. He argued with military chaplains. He researched immigration laws. Fumiko watched him fight for her and realized that no one had ever fought for her before. Not like this. It made her love him even more. In 1947, everything changed. The U.S. Congress passed the Soldier Brides Act, allowing American servicemen to bring foreign wives to the United States. It was still a bureaucratic nightmare, but it was possible. Earl immediately started the paperwork. Fumiko had to undergo humiliating medical examinations where doctors treated her like livestock. She had to prove she wasn't a prostitute, which required signed affidavits. She had to provide documentation of her identity, which was nearly impossible because all her records had burned in the bomb. Earl helped her navigate it all. He bribed clerks with cigarettes and whiskey. He called in favors. He refused to give up. Finally, in November 1947, they were approved. They were married in a small military chapel in Kure on a cold, gray morning. Fumiko wore a borrowed white dress that was too big for her. She had lost so much weight since the war. There were no family members present. No one from her past existed anymore. Earl's army buddies were the witnesses. They clapped and cheered, though Fumiko could see judgment in some of their eyes. It wasn't the wedding she had imagined as a girl. When she was young, she had dreamed of a traditional Japanese wedding, a beautiful kimono, her family surrounding her. But that dream had died with her family. This wedding was small and strange and foreign, but it was real, and it was hers. In early 1948, Fumiko boarded a military transport ship bound for San Francisco. She was 22 years old. She had lived through the atomic bomb, the occupation, and the slow death of everything she had ever known. Now she was leaving Japan forever. The ship was packed with war brides, hundreds of them, Japanese women, Korean women, Filipino women, all heading to America with husbands they barely knew. Some were excited, chattering nervously about their new lives. Some were terrified, crying quietly in their bunks. Fumiko felt nothing. She had learned to shut down her emotions to survive. Feeling meant pain, so she stopped feeling. The voyage took 2 weeks. It was miserable. The ship rocked constantly. The smell of vomit and unwashed bodies filled the lower decks. Fumiko was seasick the entire time. She barely ate. She barely slept. She just lay in her narrow bunk and stared at the ceiling and wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. What if America was worse than Japan? What if Earl's family hated her? What if she couldn't adapt? When they arrived in San Francisco in March 1948, Fumiko saw America for the first time. It was overwhelming. The buildings were enormous, taller than anything in Japan. The streets were wide and clean and filled with cars. So many cars. And the people, they were so loud, so confident. Everything was big and bright and overwhelming. Earl held her hand and told her everything would be okay. She wanted to believe him. They stayed in San Francisco for 3 days while Earl processed his discharge papers. He took her to see the Golden Gate Bridge. She stared at it in awe. It was beautiful, massive, impossible. He bought her an ice cream cone. It was sweeter than Japanese ice cream. She liked it, but it also made her sad, because her mother would never taste it. Her father would never see this bridge. Every beautiful thing was also a reminder of everything she had lost. Then they took a train east. Fumiko watched the country pass by through the window. Mountains covered in snow. Desert stretching forever. Plains that went on and on. America was so big, so empty. She felt like she was being swallowed by the landscape. Earl talked excitedly about Iowa, about his family, about the farm. But Fumiko barely heard him. She was too busy trying to memorize her new identity. She was Frances now. Frances Whitlock, not Fumiko Nakamura. That girl had died in Hiroshima. They arrived in Earl's hometown in Iowa in late March 1948. It was a farming community called Fairview, population 1,800. The town consisted of one main street with a post office, a general store, a diner, a church, and a grain elevator. Everything else was farms. Everyone knew everyone, and everyone knew that Earl Whitlock was bringing home a Japanese wife. The reactions were mixed. Some people were curious. Most were hostile. The war had ended less than 3 years ago. Many families in Fairview had lost sons in the Pacific. To them, Fumiko wasn't a war bride. She was the enemy. Earl's parents met them at the train station. His mother, Ruth, was a stern woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. She shook Fumiko's hand briefly and said welcome in a voice that suggested she meant anything but. Her grip was cold. His father, Harold, was a tall, silent man with weathered skin. He looked Fumiko up and down once and then didn't look at her again. They drove to the family farm in silence. Fumiko sat in the back seat and tried not to cry. She could feel their disapproval. This was a mistake. The farmhouse was small, but clean. Ruth showed Fumiko to the guest room. She said they could stay there until Earl found work. Fumiko thanked her in broken English. Ruth nodded curtly and left. That night, Fumiko lay in bed next to Earl and realized she had never felt more alone. She was in a foreign country. She didn't speak the language well. She had no friends, no family. Earl held her hand and promised it would get better. But Fumiko wasn't sure she believed him. The first few months were brutal. Fumiko tried desperately to fit in. She smiled at neighbors even when they didn't smile back. She went to church every Sunday and felt everyone's eyes on her. She learned to cook American food by watching Ruth. Pot roast, mashed potatoes. Everything was so bland. She missed miso soup. She missed rice. But she cooked what was expected. But nothing worked. People stared wherever she went. Children pointed and whispered. One day in May, she went to the general store to buy flour. A woman named Mildred Kowalski, whose son had died at Okinawa, saw her and walked out immediately. The store owner, Mr. Patterson, served Fumiko, but wouldn't look her in the eye. As she was leaving, he quietly suggested it might be better if she shopped at a different time, when fewer people were around. Fumiko nodded and left, her face burning with shame. She cried the entire walk home. She felt like a leper. Earl was furious when he found out. He went to the store and confronted Mr. Patterson. He told Mildred Kowalski to mind her own business. He got into a fistfight with a man at the grain elevator who called Fumiko a slur. But it didn't change anything. The town had decided who Fumiko was. She was the enemy. She would always be unwelcome. By summer of 1948, Earl had found steady work at the grain elevator. They moved into a small rental house on the edge of town. It was tiny. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with a leaky faucet. But it was theirs. For the first time since arriving in America, Fumiko had her own space. She spent her days cleaning, cooking, and trying to learn English. She listened to the radio for hours. She read children's books from the library. She practiced conversations in the mirror. She was determined to master the language. If she could speak English perfectly, maybe people would accept her. She also started systematically erasing other parts of herself. She stopped wearing anything that looked Japanese. She had brought a few kimonos with her, including one her mother had made. She put them in a box in the back of the closet. She cut her hair short, American style. She trained herself to look people in the eye when she spoke. She trained herself to speak louder. She trained herself to smile more. She erased herself piece by piece, day by day. One day in late 1948, Earl came home from work and found Fumiko burning something in the backyard. It was a small fire. She was feeding papers and photographs into it one by one. Everything she had brought from Japan, letters from friends who had died in the war, photographs of her family, a small notebook where she had practiced calligraphy, her father's book of poetry. All of it was going up in flames. Earl asked her what she was doing. She said she didn't need them anymore. She said the past was gone and there was no point holding on to it. She said she needed to move forward. Earl looked sad, but he didn't argue. That night, Fumiko lay awake and wondered if she had just made a terrible mistake. But it was too late. The letters were ash, just like Hiroshima. In the spring of 1950, Fumiko discovered she was pregnant. She was terrified. She didn't know how to be a mother. Her own mother was dead. She had no one to ask for advice. She was 24 years old and completely alone. But Earl was overjoyed. He painted the spare bedroom pale yellow. He built a crib from scratch. He told everyone in town that they were having a baby. Fumiko wanted to be excited, but all she felt was fear. What if her child faced the same hatred she did? What if people treated her baby like the enemy? She made a decision. Her child would be fully American. No Japanese name. No Japanese language. No Japanese traditions. Her child would have every advantage she didn't, even if it meant erasing herself completely. Dorothy Ruth Whitlock was born on June 14, 1950. She had Earl's blue eyes and Fumiko's dark hair. She was perfect. Fumiko held her and felt something she hadn't felt in 5 years. Hope. Maybe this was why she had survived. She promised herself that Dottie would never know pain like she had known. Fumiko would carry that weight alone. The town's attitude toward Fumiko softened slightly after Dottie was born. People liked babies. They brought casseroles and baby clothes. It wasn't acceptance, but it was tolerance. Fumiko threw herself into motherhood. She kept the house spotless. She cooked elaborate meals. She sewed all of Dottie's clothes by hand. She became the perfect American housewife. And with every passing day, Fumiko Nakamura disappeared a little more. Frances Whitlock took her place. In the fall of 1953, their second child was born, a son. They named him Warren Harold Whitlock after Earl's father. It was a peace offering. Harold had warmed up to Fumiko slightly after Dottie was born. Naming the baby after him helped. Warren was different from Dottie. He was quieter, more observant. Even as a baby, he watched everything with dark, intelligent eyes. Fumiko felt like he could see through her. It made her nervous. With 2 children, Fumiko's life became an endless blur of diapers, laundry, cooking, cleaning, school lunches, and PTA meetings. She barely had time to think, which was exactly what she wanted. Thinking meant remembering, and remembering meant pain. So she stayed busy. She volunteered at the school. She joined the church women's group. She baked pies for every potluck. She became invisible in the best way possible. By the late 1950s, Fumiko had perfected her role. She was Frances Whitlock, devoted wife and mother. She spoke English fluently, though her accent never fully disappeared. She baked pies that won ribbons. She kept a garden. She raised 2 polite children. She had successfully erased herself. But the cost was high. She felt like a ghost. Present, but not really there. As the children got older, they started to notice things. Dottie realized her mother never sang, never seemed truly happy. There was always sadness in her eyes. Warren saw how she flinched whenever someone mentioned Hiroshima, how she changed the channel if a war documentary came on, how she never talked about her childhood. When he was 10, he asked what Japan was like. She said she didn't remember. He knew she was lying. In 1965, Dottie graduated from high school. She was smart and ambitious. She wanted to go to college. Fumiko had worked extra hours cleaning houses to help save money for tuition. Dottie enrolled at the University of Iowa to study education. She wanted to be a teacher, like her grandfather had been, though she didn't know that. The day Dottie left for college, Fumiko cried. Not just because she would miss her daughter, but because Dottie was free. Free from the weight of the past. Fumiko had given her that freedom by carrying the weight alone. Warren graduated from high school in 1971. He was 18 and terrified of being drafted for Vietnam. Earl suggested he go to college to avoid it. Warren enrolled at Iowa State to study history. He was fascinated by World War II. He read everything about the Pacific Theater and the atomic bombs. He never connected it to his mother. One Thanksgiving, he mentioned a book about Hiroshima survivors. Fumiko went pale. She knocked over her water glass and left the table. She locked herself in the bathroom for an hour. Warren knew there was more, but he didn't know what. In 1972, Dottie married Robert Chen, a second-generation Chinese-American. He understood what it meant to be Asian in America. Fumiko watched her daughter marry this confident man and felt regret. Maybe hiding the past hadn't protected her children. Maybe it had robbed them of understanding where they came from. In 1975, Earl died suddenly of a heart attack. He was 53. They had been married 28 years. Fumiko had loved him. He had saved her. But she had never told him everything. At the funeral, she didn't cry. She had run out of tears 30 years ago. After Earl's death, Fumiko became quieter. She stopped going to church. She stopped baking. She spent hours staring out windows. Dottie visited weekly. Warren called from Chicago where he taught history. They tried to get her to open up. She just smiled and said she was fine. The truth was, Fumiko was exhausted. She had spent 3 decades pretending to be someone else. She had buried her language, her name, her family, her grief. And for what? So her children could be American? It had worked, but the cost had been herself. In the 1980s, Fumiko lived alone in the small house. She tended a small garden where she secretly grew Japanese vegetables. She watched the news. In 1989, she saw the Berlin Wall fall. People celebrated. She felt nothing. The world kept changing, but she was frozen in 1945. By then, Dottie had 2 teenage children. Warren had a 10-year-old son. Fumiko loved her grandchildren but kept them at a distance. She was afraid they'd ask questions she couldn't answer. In early 1989, Fumiko developed a persistent cough. By summer, she was coughing blood. In August, Dottie insisted she see a doctor. The diagnosis was lung cancer, stage 4. 6 months, maybe less. Fumiko took the news calmly. She had always known she was living on borrowed time. She had survived when she shouldn't have. She told Dottie and Warren in October. They were devastated. They wanted her to fight. But Fumiko refused treatment. She said she was tired. She said she'd lived a good life. She was ready. Dottie moved back to Fairview to care for her mother. She was 39, a principal with a family. Warren visited every weekend from Chicago. They sat with her, read to her, held her hand. They asked if there was anything she wanted to share. Fumiko smiled and said no. She said she loved them. That was all. In her final weeks, Fumiko thought about Chio, her younger sister. Chio had been 14 in 1945, living in Osaka. After the war, she had searched desperately for Fumiko. She finally tracked her down in 1950 and wrote a joyful letter begging her to respond. But Fumiko never did. She couldn't. Going back meant facing everything she had buried. Chio kept writing anyway. Once a month for 40 years. Letters about her life, her marriage, her children. Fumiko read every letter, but she never responded. It was the cruelest thing she had done. Now, dying, she regretted it. But it was too late. Fumiko Nakamura Whitlock died on March 12, 1990. She was 63. She had lived in America for 42 years. Dottie was holding her hand. Her last words were in Japanese. Mother, Father, Takeshi, please wait for me. Then she was gone. The funeral was small. Neighbors came. People from church. They said goodbye to Francis Whitlock. They didn't know they were also saying goodbye to Fumiko Nakamura. Dottie and Warren cried. They felt like they were burying a stranger. A week later, they sorted through her belongings. There were no photographs of Japan. No letters. Then Warren found something in the back of her closet. A small wooden box wrapped in a faded silk scarf. It was locked. Warren pried it open. Inside were things they had never seen. A photograph of a young woman in a beautiful kimono, smiling. It was their mother, but so different. So happy. There were dozens of letters in Japanese from Chio Nakamura in Hiroshima, postmarks from 1950 to 1988. 38 years of letters, a notebook filled with calligraphy, a pressed flower, a tiny origami crane, a military document with her original name, Fumiko Nakamura, born April 2, 1926 in Hiroshima, and a list of names, Nakamura Kenji, Nakamura Hana, Nakamura Takeshi. Next to each, gone. Dottie cried. Warren stared. They understood. Their mother had lost everything, and she had never told them. They realized she had carried a weight they couldn't imagine. Warren became obsessed with finding Chio. He took leave from teaching. He hired a translator. It took months, but he found her. Chio Yamada was 72, living in Hiroshima. When Warren called, she cried. She said she thought Fumiko had forgotten her. Warren told her the truth. Fumiko had kept every letter. Chio sent everything. Photographs of Fumiko as a child. Letters from 1949. Stories about their family. Warren and Dottie read everything. They realized they had never known her at all. In spring 1991, Warren and Dottie traveled to Japan. They met Chio at the Peace Memorial. She was small and frail. When she saw them, she cried and hugged them. She said they looked like Fumiko. They spent 3 days together. Chio showed them where the Nakamura house had been. Just a park now. Chio took them to the Peace Memorial Museum. It was devastating. Before leaving, Chio gave them one more letter. Fumiko had written it in 1949. Warren had it translated. It said, "Dear Chio, I am alive, but the person I was is gone. America is cold. People hate me. I cannot come back. Everything is gone. I am barely surviving. So I will stay. I will become American. I will forget Japan. Because if I do not forget, I will die. I am sorry. I must forget to survive. I cannot be Fumiko anymore. Forgive me." Warren and Dottie wept. Their mother had been so alone, and she had hidden it all. Before leaving Japan, they brought their mother's ashes. Chio took them to the Peace Memorial. She pointed to names: Nakamura Kenji, Hana, Takeshi. Warren and Dottie scattered ashes there. Fumiko could finally rest as herself. Back in America, Warren wrote an article about Japanese war brides. Dottie started a scholarship. They made sure their children knew the truth. The story of Fumiko Nakamura is not unique. Between 1947 and 1964, 50,000 Japanese women married American servicemen. They faced discrimination. Many hid their pasts. They buried their trauma. Many took secrets to the grave. These women sacrificed everything. They crossed an ocean for love, and they paid with their silence. Their stories deserve to be remembered, because these women were survivors. They were mothers who erased themselves so their children could thrive, and that sacrifice should never be forgotten. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts and hit the like button. History is built on untold stories like Fumiko's, and by sharing them, we make sure they are never forgotten.